The curse of conscience. The paradox of being a good person often begins with a whisper, a quiet voice inside that tells you what is right, what is just, what is kind. That voice, known as conscience, is often praised as a moral compass, a guide to a virtuous life. But what no one warns you about is the weight it carries. Because the deeper your conscience runs, the heavier it becomes, and as strange as it may seem, the more committed you are to being good, the more likely you are to be burdened with guilt. Guilt is not something that only the wicked feel. In fact, it may be that those who care most about doing the right thing are the ones who suffer the most when they fall short. A good person doesn't just move on. They replay the scene in their head, questioning every word, every gesture. Could I have been kinder? Should I have said less or more? They carry not just the memory of the moment, but the weight of their own expectation. The curse of conscience is that it never truly rests. A person with a strong moral compass is rarely at peace, even in stillness. Their mind replays old mistakes like a looping record. They grieve over things that others forget. They take responsibility not just for their actions, but for their thoughts. And because of that, they often hold themselves to impossible standards. Standards that others don't even think to measure. People with deep empathy feel guilt for things they didn't do but might have done. They feel pain for those they couldn't save. They regret moments when they didn't speak up or times when they spoke too harshly, even if they had every right to. They live not just in the present, but in a world of endless what-ifs, each one tinted with a shade of sorrow. Ironically, it's often those with the softest hearts who feel the sharpest blades of guilt, not because they are wrong, but because they wish to always be right in the moral sense. They wish to do no harm, to cause no suffering, to be a presence of peace in a world that's already bruised and broken. But such a wish is an impossible burden. The world is complex. Choices aren't always clean, and sometimes even doing the right thing leads to someone else's pain. Imagine a person who refuses to lie, not even a little white lie. They want to be honest because honesty is a virtue, but in telling the truth, they hurt someone's feelings. Even though they did the right thing, they still feel guilt, not because they were wrong, but because they caused hurt. This is the paradox. Being good doesn't shield you from guilt. It often deepens your capacity for it. A bad person rarely loses sleep over the harm they cause, but a good person will lose sleep over harm they didn't even intend. They apologize for tone, for timing, for simply existing in the wrong place at the wrong time. Their internal world is a courtroom, and their conscience is the relentless prosecutor, bringing charges for crimes of omission, missteps, or merely not being perfect enough. This kind of guilt is exhausting. It creates a state of hyper-awareness. Every interaction is scanned and rescanned. Was I kind enough? Did I listen deeply enough? Did I show up the way I should have? And when the answer isn't a resounding yes, the guilt rushes in like a tide. It's not dramatic or loud, it's quiet and persistent. It hums beneath the surface of daily life, a constant reminder that you could have done better. But guilt, in the hands of a good person, can become something worse than a feeling. It becomes an identity. I should have known better turns into, I am not good enough. The line between behavior and being blurs. Mistakes stop being events and become evidence. Evidence that you are failing to live up to who you're supposed to be. The good person doesn't just seek forgiveness. They seek redemption from themselves. The curse of conscience is amplified in a world that rarely forgives. We are taught to move fast, to succeed, to compete. There is little room for reflection, even less for healing. And so, those who carry guilt carry it alone. They smile in public, but ache in private. They offer comfort to others, but deny it to themselves. They become their own jailers, locked inside a cell made of their own standards. And yet, the very thing that torments them is what makes them beautiful. Their guilt is proof of their care. Their restlessness is a sign of their responsibility. They do not float through life indifferent to consequence. They are awake, alive, aware. It's just that awareness can sometimes feel like too much to bear. There is also a quiet heroism in this burden. To feel guilt deeply is to be emotionally honest. It is to say, I hurt someone and I care. It is to admit, I made a mistake and I want to be better. It is not weakness, it is strength in its rawest form. The strength to face your flaws without turning away. The strength to carry your conscience even when it weighs you down. But even this strength has limits, and that is why the good person must learn balance. They must learn that guilt is not a sentence, it's a signal. It tells you that something matters to you, it tells you that you want to grow, but it is not meant to be a permanent home. You visit it, learn from it, and move forward. Carrying guilt forever doesn't make you more moral, it only makes you more tired. Self-forgiveness is not letting yourself off the hook. It is acknowledging that being good is not being perfect, that you are human and humanity comes with mess. You will misjudge, misstep, miscommunicate, but you will also correct, apologize, and evolve, and that too is part of being good, the willingness to change. There's a saying, the road to hell is paved with good intentions, but perhaps that's only true when we carry those intentions like chains, punishing ourselves for every stumble. A better truth might be, the road to peace is walked by those who forgive themselves for failing and try again anyway. Conscience should not be a whip, it should be a compass. When it becomes a tool for self-punishment, it loses its purpose. It's there to guide, not to torment. The good person must remember that. And perhaps the final paradox is this: the people who question whether they are good are often the ones who already are. The fact that you wrestle with guilt, that you ache to do better, is not a flaw. It is evidence of your heart. The very struggle is the sign. You're not failing, you're trying, and that means more than you know. So breathe, let go, not because you don't care, but because you do. You care enough to grow. You care enough to rest. You care enough to forgive yourself, not to forget, but to be free. Because being good is not about never feeling guilt, it's about learning when to set it down and walk forward anyway. Kindness as a burden, when your compassion becomes an open door for exploitation. Kindness is often praised as a virtue, celebrated as the gold thread that holds human decency together. It's what we teach our children, what we strive to embody, and what we hope to receive. But beneath the beauty of kindness lies a quiet vulnerability, a door that, once left open too long, invites more than gratitude. Sometimes, it invites exploitation. And in the life of a good person, kindness can become more than an act of care. It can become a burden too heavy to carry. At first, kindness is natural. It flows from empathy, from shared humanity, from the simple desire to ease another's suffering. It feels good to help, to support, to listen, to give without being asked. But the world is not always gentle in return. In the presence of a kind soul, there are those who take, and then take more. Not everyone sees kindness as something to be respected. Some see it as something to be used. It begins subtly. A friend leans on you during a hard time, and then again and again, until your emotional space belongs to them. A coworker asks for help with a task, and soon it becomes your responsibility entirely. A partner avoids accountability, knowing your compassion will cover for their shortcomings. Over time, your kindness stops feeling like a choice. It becomes expected. It becomes demanded. And without realizing it, your boundaries begin to disappear. Kind people often struggle to say no, not because they lack the words, but because they fear the impact. They imagine the disappointment in someone's eyes, the frustration, the withdrawal of affection. They've built their identity around being supportive, dependable, selfless. And to deny someone is to risk being called selfish. It's to risk not being liked. And for someone who has always used kindness to build connection, that fear runs deep. But saying yes to everyone is a slow erosion. You lose pieces of yourself in small decisions, extra hours worked, emotions bottled, discomfort endured, all in the name of peace, all in the name of being good. The burden grows in silence. You find yourself exhausted but unable to explain why. After all, no one forced you, you were just being kind. But beneath the surface, you begin to realize that your kindness has become currency, and others have learned how to spend it. There are people who recognize this, even if they don't say it out loud. They see the pattern. You'll forgive easily, give second chances, overextend yourself to avoid conflict. You become the emotional cushion, the unpaid therapist, the one who picks up the pieces every time. Your generosity becomes the default, and instead of being met with appreciation, it's met with entitlement. They don't thank you. They expect you, and that expectation becomes your prison. What makes this paradox so painful is that your intentions remain pure. You don't help to gain power. You don't give to manipulate. You act out of genuine care. But care without limits invites imbalance, and imbalance invites resentment. You begin to notice that the people you've supported are nowhere to be found when you need help. Your phone, always open for them, is silent when you are in pain. Your sacrifices go unacknowledged. Your exhaustion goes unseen. And yet, you still feel guilty pulling back. You worry that if you stop being kind, you'll stop being good. You've woven your worth into your willingness to be available, to be agreeable, to be understanding. But the truth is, kindness without boundaries isn't kindness. It's submission. It's self-abandonment. And over time, it doesn't make the world a better place, it just makes you disappear. There's a quiet sadness in realizing that your kindness has been misinterpreted not as strength, but as weakness. People assume you'll bend because you always have. They mistake your patience for passivity, your grace for approval, and once that belief sets in, it's hard to undo. If you suddenly draw a line, you're accused of changing. If you finally say no, you're called cold or difficult. The very people who once relied on your softness now resent your boundaries. But kindness was never meant to be unconditional obedience. It is not a contract that says, "I will hurt so you don't have to." It is not a silent agreement to carry what isn't yours. True kindness includes self-kindness. It honors both your desire to help others and your need to remain whole. When your kindness costs you your peace, your health, your identity, it's no longer a gift. It's a sacrifice you didn't need to make. Somewhere along the way, many good people learn that being taken advantage of is the price of being kind. They internalize the belief that to be good is to be endlessly giving, even to their own detriment. But this belief is not wisdom, it is conditioning, and it's often passed down through culture, family, or religion. The idea that your value lies in how much you can endure for others. But you are not a resource to be depleted. You are not a bottomless well of support. The hardest lesson a kind person must learn is that not everyone deserves their kindness. Not every situation calls for their intervention. Not every pain is theirs to heal. Kindness, when practiced with discernment, becomes powerful. It becomes a conscious choice rather than a compulsion. It becomes a boundary with warmth, not a wall built from exhaustion. And in this way, it becomes sustainable. You are allowed to care and still walk away. You are allowed to help and still rest. You are allowed to say no, not out of cruelty but out of wisdom. You are allowed to protect your time, your energy, your emotional space. This doesn't make you selfish, it makes you sovereign. It means your kindness is real because it comes from strength, not from fear. It's also important to remember that kindness is not always gentle. Sometimes it's direct, sometimes it's honest, sometimes it's saying, "I can't do this for you," or "That's not okay with me." These moments may not look like kindness on the surface. They may upset people. But in the long run, they are the kindest things you can do because they protect both of you from a false relationship built on imbalance. When you allow yourself to be exploited in the name of kindness, you teach others how to treat you. And unfortunately, you also teach them that it's okay to take without giving, that it's okay to lean on you without ever standing up themselves. But when you draw a line, you offer something more valuable: the opportunity for mutual respect, the chance for reciprocity, the foundation for a relationship where kindness flows in both directions. This kind of kindness isn't loud. It doesn't always feel heroic. It often feels uncomfortable because it goes against everything you've been taught about goodness. But it is the only path to a kind life that doesn't hollow you out. It is the only path that allows you to be both soft and strong, giving and guarded, open and protected. So if you find yourself tired of being the one who always says yes, tired of carrying others while your own legs shake, know that you are not failing. You are waking up. You are beginning to see the difference between kindness and compliance. And you are learning that your kindness is most powerful when it includes you too. You do not owe everyone your time. You do not owe everyone your energy. You do not have to prove your goodness by being endlessly available. Your worth is not measured by how much of yourself you give away. You are already enough, even when you say no, even when you step back, even when you choose peace over pleasing. In the end, kindness is not about becoming less for others. It's about becoming more of yourself. It's about giving with an open heart, but also knowing when to close the door. And that, perhaps, is the greatest kindness of all, the empathy trap. How deeply feeling others' pain can drown your own sense of self. Empathy is a quiet miracle. It allows us to feel what others feel, to cry when someone else is hurting, to celebrate when someone else is joyful. It creates bridges between minds, softens judgment, and reminds us that we are not alone in the world. But empathy, like all powerful things, can become a trap. For those with deep sensitivity, the ability to absorb the emotions of others can become a slow unraveling of their own sense of self. In the name of compassion, they become containers for pain that was never theirs to hold. The deeply empathetic person walks through life with open doors, doors through which the emotions of others come flooding in. They don't just listen to someone's sorrow, they feel it in their bones. They don't just witness anxiety, it echoes in their own nervous system. And while this ability brings immense understanding and closeness, it also carries a hidden cost. Because the more you feel for others, the more you risk losing track of where they end and you begin. At first, it might feel like a gift. Empathy helps you connect, makes you a good friend, partner, or caretaker. You can sense when someone's energy shifts. You notice what others miss. You offer comfort in ways that feel like home. But slowly, your emotional landscape starts to look more like a reflection of everyone else's pain than a portrait of your own truth. You wake up with heaviness that isn't yours. You lose sleep over someone else's stress. You begin to carry burdens that no one asked you to carry. This is the empathy trap, the feeling that to be good, to be kind, you must suffer alongside others, or even suffer instead of them. You become the emotional sponge, soaking up every drop of discomfort, grief, anger, and fear that surrounds you. And because you don't want others to feel alone, you open yourself wider. You become a mirror for pain. You reflect it, absorb it, and sometimes you lose yourself inside it. Empaths often find themselves in one-sided relationships, friendships or partnerships where they give and give, always understanding, always accommodating. They justify others' behavior because they can see the root of it. They excuse emotional distance because they understand trauma. They tolerate mistreatment because they sense the wound behind the action, and in doing so they make themselves invisible. Their needs shrink, their voice fades, their boundaries dissolve. There's a fine line between understanding and enabling, between compassion and collapse. The empathetic person walks this line every day. They wonder if standing up for themselves is selfish. They hesitate to speak their needs, worried they'll add to someone else's burden. They downplay their struggles because others have it worse. But pain is not a competition. And empathy that silences your truth is no longer empathy, it's self-erasure. The paradox is that the more emotionally attuned you are, the more vulnerable you become to emotional overwhelm. Empathy without limits is like a house without walls. Everything gets in, and over time, that exposure can lead to fatigue, anxiety, and even depression. You start to dread phone calls, avoid social gatherings, not because you don't care, but because you care too much. Everyone's suffering feels like your responsibility, and so you withdraw, not from apathy, but from emotional survival. It's not uncommon for empaths to experience a kind of emotional identity crisis. When you've spent so long feeling for others, it becomes difficult to distinguish your own feelings. You ask yourself, am I sad, or am I feeling someone else's sadness? You struggle to make decisions, unsure whether your choices are yours or shaped by others' desires. Your empathy, once a source of connection, becomes a fog that clouds your inner compass. In moments of solitude, you may feel a strange emptiness. Without someone else's emotions to tune into, you're left with silence. And sometimes, that silence feels frightening, because you've spent so long being attuned to others that you've forgotten how to be with yourself. Who are you when you're not managing someone else's pain? What do you want, need, or feel when no one else's energy is influencing yours? Learning to live with deep empathy requires learning to hold space without being consumed. It means listening without absorbing, caring without collapsing. It means understanding that you can sit with someone's pain without making it your own. You can be present without disappearing. You can support without surrendering your own emotional ground. This is not easy, especially in a world that often equates empathy with selflessness and selflessness with silence. But boundaries are not barriers. They are the structures that allow your empathy to remain sustainable. Without them, you burn out. You grow resentful. You become so overwhelmed that you begin to shut down. And when that happens, your empathy becomes a wound instead of a strength. Self-awareness is the first step out of the empathy trap. Begin by noticing when your energy shifts in response to others. Ask yourself, is this mine? Practice moments of grounding, simple pauses to breathe, to return to your own body. Create rituals of emotional separation, gentle ways to release the feelings you've picked up throughout the day. Whether it's writing, meditation, or walking alone in nature, these rituals help restore the boundary between you and the world. It also helps to surround yourself with those who understand and respect your sensitivity, people who don't just take from your empathy but offer their own in return. Mutual care is not a luxury, it's essential. You need spaces where your emotions are heard, where your burdens are not dismissed, where your kindness is reciprocated. You deserve to be held, just as you hold others. And most importantly, remind yourself often you are not responsible for everyone's healing. You are not the solution to everyone's suffering. You can be a source of comfort, but you cannot be the cure. Their pain is not your punishment. Their chaos is not your cross to bear. Your worth is not measured by how much you hurt for others. It is measured by your ability to stay whole while loving deeply. Empathy becomes powerful when paired with wisdom, when you know where to give and where to step back, when you can see someone struggle and still honor your own peace. This kind of empathy doesn't demand your self-sacrifice, it invites your self-awareness. It asks not just, how can I help them, but also, what do I need to stay grounded, clear, and well? There will still be moments when your heart aches for the world. That ache is part of your gift, but you can learn to hold that ache gently instead of letting it hollow you out. You can feel without falling apart. You can care deeply and still protect your soul. So if you've found yourself exhausted by empathy, know that you are not broken. You are simply learning how to carry a gift that is heavier than it seems. You are discovering that your compassion must begin with yourself, and that loving others does not require losing who you are. In the end, empathy is not about merging with pain. It's about witnessing it with presence and grace. It's about holding space without filling it. It's about being a mirror, not a sponge. And when you learn to reflect rather than absorb, you keep both your light and your clarity. Your empathy is sacred. Let it be a bridge, not a weight. Let it connect, not consume. Let it illuminate the path, not bury the traveler. Good doesn't mean safe. Why the world doesn't reward goodness with protection. There is a quiet belief that runs deep in the hearts of those who strive to be good. It whispers that if you live with integrity, if you treat others with care, if you do the right thing even when it's hard, then somehow life will protect you, that goodness will act as a shield, that the world will see your effort and reward you with kindness in return. But life doesn't always work that way. The world is not structured to guarantee safety for the virtuous, and being a good person, no matter how consistent, does not make you immune to harm. The harsh truth is that goodness is not armor. It does not deflect betrayal. It does not prevent heartbreak. It does not guarantee fairness or justice. Good people still lose jobs, still get lied to, still find themselves overlooked, abandoned, or taken for granted. Sometimes, the more generous you are, the more others assume you'll tolerate mistreatment. Sometimes, the quieter you speak, the easier it is for others to ignore your voice. This realization can come as a deep shock, especially to those who have lived with the hope that goodness would protect them from the world's cruelty, that being honest would spare them from deception, that being giving would protect them from greed, that being faithful would guarantee loyalty in return. But life does not operate on moral equations. People are not always fair, and the universe does not always intervene on behalf of the kind. This does not mean that goodness is meaningless. It means that goodness is not a contract. It's not a transaction with the world. You don't do it in exchange for protection. You do it because it aligns with who you are. But when you believe goodness will shield you, you may find yourself unprepared for how often it doesn't. You may be blindsided by betrayal, stunned by injustice, confused by suffering, and in those moments, it's easy to question everything. Easy to wonder if the effort is worth it, if doing the right thing even matters. Many good people go through this kind of crisis. They look at their lives and wonder why they're still hurting, why their loyalty wasn't returned, why their kindness wasn't reciprocated, why, despite their honesty, they were still misunderstood. The pain runs deep, not just because of what happened, but because of what it seems to reveal. That maybe the world is indifferent to their goodness, that maybe being good changes nothing. But this is where the paradox lives. Goodness does change things, but not always in the way we expect. It doesn't make you invincible. It makes you open. And in that openness, you feel more, both the beauty and the pain. Goodness softens your heart, but it also leaves you more exposed. You notice cruelty more sharply. You feel injustice more deeply. You are more sensitive to betrayal because you would never do the same. You are more affected by harm because your nature is to heal, not to hurt. In a world that often rewards aggression, ambition, and noise, goodness can feel like weakness. People mistake gentleness for naivety. They confuse patience with passivity, and so the good person must walk through a world where their virtues are often unrecognized, their efforts uncelebrated. They are not protected by their goodness. If anything, they are more vulnerable because they're less willing to strike back, less likely to seek revenge, less inclined to play the game. And yet, this vulnerability is not failure. It is evidence of strength, the kind of strength that refuses to become hardened, the kind that doesn't let the world's darkness change its light. Being good in a world that doesn't always reward goodness is an act of quiet courage. It's a choice to stay soft in a place that often punishes softness. It's the decision to live with integrity even when no one notices. It's the willingness to walk alone if necessary, rather than abandon your values. But the good person must also learn this: you are allowed to protect yourself. You are allowed to be kind and still say no. You are allowed to be generous and still set limits. You are allowed to be loving and still choose distance when someone harms you. Being good does not mean being defenseless. Being moral does not mean being a martyr. You can live with heart and still have boundaries. You can care and still protect your peace. The mistake many good people make is believing they have to endure suffering in silence, that to complain is to be ungrateful, that to withdraw is to be unkind. But protecting your well-being is not the opposite of goodness. It is the extension of it. Your goodness must include yourself, or it will eventually consume you. You can give without losing. You can help without being harmed. You can shine without burning out. Part of the journey of being good is realizing that the world owes you nothing in return. This is not to say that kindness goes unnoticed or that love doesn't matter, but rather that the reward is not always external. It's not always applause or protection or reciprocation. Sometimes the only reward for being good is knowing that you stayed true to who you are, that you didn't compromise, that even when no one was watching, you chose what was right. That might not sound like much in a world obsessed with outcomes, but it is everything, because while goodness may not protect you from harm, it does something deeper. It protects your soul. It anchors you in storms. It gives you a compass when the road is unclear, and in the end, it creates a life that feels whole, because it was lived with intention, with care, with authenticity. It's natural to want protection. It's human to want reassurance that if we live well, life will go well. But part of growing up, part of waking up, is realizing that the world does not operate on fairness. Pain comes to the innocent. Injustice touches the righteous. And still, you can choose to be good. Not because it guarantees safety, but because it defines your spirit. And maybe that's the true strength of goodness. Not that it protects you from life, but that it allows you to endure life with grace. That it keeps your heart intact, even when the world tries to break it. That it keeps you open to love, even after you've been hurt. That it lets you rise, again and again, not with bitterness, but with resolve. Being good doesn't mean being blind. It doesn't mean pretending the world is better than it is. It means seeing the truth and choosing kindness anyway. It means feeling the pain and choosing to heal instead of harm. It means understanding that you are not owed safety and still showing up with love. There will be days when it feels too much, when your goodness feels like a weight, when your efforts feel invisible, when your heart feels too exposed. On those days, remember this: your goodness is not weakness. It is quiet rebellion. It is resistance against cynicism. It is proof that even in a world that may not protect you, you have chosen to protect what matters most: your humanity. You may not be rewarded by the world, you may not be protected by fate, but you will be rooted, you will be whole, and that wholeness is something no cruelty can take from you. It is the light you carry, the truth you live, the legacy you leave behind, not in wealth, not in titles, but in the way you made others feel, the way you held yourself, the way you chose compassion when it cost you something. Goodness doesn't make you safe, but it makes you real, and in a world of masks, that might be the bravest thing of all. Martyrdom versus morality. When doing the right thing feels more like self-destruction. There comes a point in the life of every good person where the lines begin to blur. The line between right and wrong becomes less about clarity and more about weight. The more they try to do what's right, the heavier it feels. The more they strive to be moral, the more it seems to cost them, emotionally, mentally, even physically. And without realizing it, morality begins to bleed into martyrdom. They start to confuse self-sacrifice with virtue. They begin to believe that being good must hurt. Martyrdom, in its quiet modern form, rarely wears a crown of thorns. It wears smiles. It says, "I'm fine," when it's not. It works extra hours without complaint. It listens endlessly without being heard. It shows up even when depleted. It apologizes for taking up space. It chooses silence over conflict, acceptance over boundaries, exhaustion over rest. All in the name of doing the right thing, all in the belief that goodness means putting everyone else first, even if it means losing yourself in the process. The danger here is not in caring. It's in caring so much that you forget you matter too. Martyrdom doesn't always announce itself. Sometimes it looks like pride in being dependable. Sometimes it looks like being the strong one, the reliable one, the one who always says yes. But underneath, there's often a quiet erosion, a soul stretched thin, a life lived for others, with no room left for self. Morality, in its truest form, is meant to guide, not to grind you into dust. It is not meant to be a punishment, but a compass. But when the idea of doing the right thing is tangled up with chronic self-denial, the compass starts spinning. You begin to believe that any choice that benefits you must be selfish, that any action which centers your needs must be suspect. You become your own judge, jury, and executioner, accusing yourself of greed every time you pause to breathe. The martyr complex tells us that suffering equals value, that pain purifies, that struggle sanctifies. But this is not morality. This is conditioning, and it's often rooted in deep cultural or familial narratives, messages passed down through generations, spoken or unspoken, that to be worthy you must give more than you have, that love must be earned through sacrifice, that goodness means silence, that your discomfort is the price of someone else's peace. The truth is, doing the right thing shouldn't always hurt. It may challenge you, it may ask for courage, but if it consistently leads to your own diminishment, something is wrong. Because morality is not a call to self-destruction, it is a call to integrity, and integrity includes how you treat yourself. There's a subtle form of pride in martyrdom, a belief that your suffering proves your righteousness, that your pain is a kind of moral currency. And in a world that often fails to reward goodness, this suffering can feel like the only tangible result. If no one sees your efforts, at least you feel them. At least your exhaustion is proof that you're trying. But what if you didn't need to be exhausted to be good? What if the real test of morality isn't how much you can endure, but how wisely you can choose? Self-sacrifice is noble only when it's a choice, not an identity. When it becomes who you are, you lose sight of what you're sacrificing for. You forget that you're allowed to be whole. You start to live from depletion rather than purpose. And that's when morality loses its meaning. Because goodness born from guilt is not truly good, it is obligation. It is fear of being not enough. Many good people carry the weight of the world on their shoulders. They say yes when they want to say no. They give when they need to receive. They comfort when they are crying inside. They feel responsible for everyone's happiness but their own. And over time, this becomes the script of their life, until one day, they realize they are disappearing. Not all at once, slowly, a piece here, a need there, a dream abandoned, a voice gone quiet. It's easy to admire the person who sacrifices everything. They are seen as strong, as selfless. But who holds them when they fall? Who tells them they're allowed to stop? Often, no one, because their role is so familiar, so expected, that even those closest to them don't notice their fading light. And so, they continue, smiling through the ache, carrying burdens no one sees. But what if you stopped? What if you allowed your morality to include yourself? What if the right thing wasn't always the hard thing? What if goodness could feel like peace instead of pressure? There is a difference between generosity and depletion, between being available and being erased, between caring and crumbling. You are allowed to do good without breaking. You are allowed to help without hurting. You are allowed to be moral without being a martyr. The truest morality is one that sustains, not one that drains. It recognizes your humanity. It honors your limits. It asks not for perfection, but for presence, not for sacrifice, but for sincerity. And it understands that a burned-out person cannot be a beacon, that someone who has forgotten their own worth cannot fully reflect the worth of others. The world does not need more martyrs. It needs more people who are grounded, whole, and awake. People who can give from a place of fullness, not fatigue. People who can stand for what's right without standing in their own way. People who know that self-care is not selfish, it is the foundation of every meaningful action. So if you find yourself always doing the right thing and still feeling empty, ask yourself, who taught you that goodness meant suffering? Who convinced you that saying yes to others always meant saying no to yourself? Who made you believe that your needs were less important? And then, gently, begin to rewrite that story. Begin to allow for a new kind of morality, one that includes rest, joy, laughter, ease, one that allows you to walk away when something hurts too much, one that gives you permission to choose yourself when no one else does. You are not required to bleed to be kind. You are not required to break to be moral. You are not required to burn your own light to keep others warm. The right thing is not always the painful thing. Sometimes it's the liberating one. The one that says, I matter too. Let go of the belief that your suffering makes you holy. Let go of the story that tells you you're only good if you're exhausted. You do not need to prove your goodness through pain. You prove it by how you love. And love, at its most honest, includes yourself. Martyrdom will always whisper, give more. But morality, at its core, whispers something softer. Be whole. The quiet of integrity. Doing what's right, even when no one applauds or even notices. Integrity lives in the quiet moments. It is not loud, and it does not seek the spotlight. It is the decision to tell the truth when lying would be easier. It is the act of returning what is not yours, even when no one is looking. It is the small voice within that says, do what is right, not for recognition, not for reward, but because that's who you are. And yet, in a world driven by approval and applause, integrity can feel invisible. There's something lonely about doing the right thing when no one notices. We're taught to associate virtue with praise, with validation. We grow up receiving gold stars, trophies, compliments for being good, and somewhere along the way, many of us begin to link morality with external affirmation. If no one claps, if no one sees, did it even matter? But true integrity is not fed by applause. It is not transactional. It exists even in isolation, even in silence. The challenge of integrity is that it rarely pays off in obvious ways. You may do the right thing and lose friends. You may stand up for truth and face backlash. You may return a lost wallet and receive no thanks. And in these moments you may wonder, why bother? Why do what's right when the world seems indifferent? But the answer lies not in what you get, but in who you become. Integrity shapes your character, not your reputation, and character is who you are when the room is empty. In the absence of recognition, your moral compass becomes your only guide. And that's where integrity shines. When no one is watching, when no one will ever know, when no one will congratulate you, that's when integrity speaks. It whispers, do it anyway. It reminds you that you are accountable not to the crowd, but to your own soul. That doing right is not about being seen, it's about being whole. This is not always easy, especially when you live in a culture obsessed with visibility. We broadcast our accomplishments, we measure value by likes, by shares, by applause. And so, the quiet path of integrity can feel like walking through a crowd in silence. You give up the thrill of being celebrated. You give up the comfort of external validation. But what you gain is deeper: peace, self-trust, alignment. People often ask how to build self-esteem. The answer is rarely spoken, but always true: live with integrity. Do what you know is right, even when it costs you, especially when it costs you, because when your actions match your values, when your behavior aligns with your inner truth, you begin to trust yourself, and that trust is unshakable. It does not waver with opinion. It does not vanish with rejection. It is rooted in the knowledge that you are who you say you are. But integrity doesn't always feel good. Sometimes it feels like choosing solitude. Sometimes it feels like walking away when everyone else stays. Sometimes it means staying silent when the crowd demands your voice, or speaking up when everyone else is silent. It requires discernment, discipline, and courage, and sometimes it requires grief. Because doing the right thing can mean losing comfort, connection, or control. There is no glamour in these moments, no celebration, just you, your conscience, and the weight of your choice. But in this quiet space, something profound happens. You discover what you truly believe in. You discover your strength, and you begin to live not for approval, but for alignment. You begin to live a life that feels honest, even when it's hard. The world may not applaud you. It may not even notice, but you will know, and that knowing is worth more than gold. It is worth more than praise. It is the soft certainty that you are living in integrity, that your inner life and outer life are not at odds, that you are not wearing a mask, that you are not betraying yourself for applause. This kind of living is rare, and it is often misunderstood. People may call you rigid. They may say you're too sensitive, too principled, too serious, but that's only because they are used to people who bend, people who trade truth for convenience, people who compromise in the name of ease. Your consistency makes them uncomfortable, not because it is wrong, but because it reflects what they have given up. You will not always be liked, but you will be respected by those who matter, and most importantly, by yourself. Respect earned through integrity is different from admiration earned through performance. It is deeper, quieter, and far more enduring. It does not depend on trends. It does not need to be maintained with effort. It simply is. There will be times when you feel invisible, when your efforts go unnoticed, your sacrifices unappreciated. But remember, integrity is not a performance. It is a practice. A way of moving through the world that leaves you able to sleep at night, able to meet your own eyes in the mirror, able to carry yourself with dignity, not because others see it, but because you do. Some of the greatest acts of goodness will never be known. The stranger who pays for someone's groceries and disappears, the employee who returns the extra change without saying a word, the friend who keeps a confidence without reminding you of it. These small, silent acts make the world better in ways that can't be measured. They are the quiet ripples of integrity, touching lives without needing to be recognized. You may never get credit, you may never be thanked, but you will be clean inside. And in a world that so often feels polluted by dishonesty, that kind of clarity is rare and radiant. It allows you to move through life without the weight of hidden lies, without the burden of pretending, without the anxiety of being caught in contradiction. Integrity is not about never failing. It is about noticing when you've strayed and gently returning. It is about self-correction, not self-punishment. About owning your mistakes without defending them. About learning, growing, and staying honest with yourself, even when it's uncomfortable. It is a path, not a pedestal. And every step you take on it brings you closer to who you were always meant to be. So walk quietly but confidently. Know that every right choice, no matter how small, adds to a life of depth and meaning. Know that your honesty matters, even if it's not celebrated. Know that your actions echo in ways you may never see. And most of all, know that your integrity is enough. Even in silence, even in solitude, even in the dark. There is no need to shout who you are. Let your life speak. Let your actions reveal your truth. Let your consistency be your testimony. And trust that even if no one notices, the quiet of integrity is its own reward. The good person's dilemma. Being good often means making others uncomfortable. Being a good person is often imagined as being agreeable, gentle, and kind, someone who makes others feel safe and comfortable. But the reality is far more complex. Sometimes being good doesn't mean keeping the peace. Sometimes it means disturbing it. Sometimes being good means making choices that make others uncomfortable, not because you're unkind, but because you are honest. Not because you want conflict, but because you refuse to be silent in the face of what's wrong. And that is the good person's dilemma. The recognition that doing what's right and doing what's pleasant are not always the same. There is an unspoken expectation in many cultures that the good person is the one who gets along with everyone. They're the peacemaker, the harmonizer, the one who smiles through discomfort and avoids difficult conversations. But this version of goodness is incomplete. It reduces morality to politeness and flattens integrity into passivity. True goodness has depth, and with that depth comes the responsibility to challenge, to speak up, to draw boundaries, even when it disrupts the comfort of others. The moment you stand for something, truly stand, you will be met with resistance. When you say no to injustice, when you defend someone being mistreated, when you question the behavior of someone in power, you are disrupting the illusion of ease. People who benefit from the way things are will often push back when you suggest they should change. Your presence becomes a mirror, and what you reflect may not be welcome. You may be labeled difficult. You may be called too sensitive, too serious, too intense. Your refusal to remain silent can make others squirm, not because you are wrong, but because they are confronted with something they would rather avoid: the need to grow. The truth is, not everyone wants goodness if it requires effort. They prefer comfort over conscience, appearance over authenticity, and when your goodness shines a light on that, they may turn away. But you are not here to be agreeable at the cost of your soul. You are not here to nod along with what you know is wrong. You are not here to dilute your truth to fit someone else's version of nice. Being a good person means being willing to disappoint people in order to stay in alignment with your values. It means being willing to be misunderstood. It means accepting that sometimes your goodness will feel like friction to those who expect your compliance. This doesn't mean being combative or cruel. True goodness is never about dominance or superiority, but it is about clarity. It is about choosing what is right, even when it's hard. And sometimes, the hardest thing is watching people become uncomfortable with your boundaries, your honesty, or your refusal to play along. Especially when those people are close to you. Especially when they've come to rely on your silence. You may find yourself caught in relationships where your role has always been to accommodate, to absorb, to smooth things over. And the moment you begin to shift, that moment you express a need, say no, or name a harm, you are met with shock, as if you'd broken an unspoken contract. Because the goodness they valued in you wasn't your morality, it was your compliance. This is the heartbreaking truth for many good people. The more you grow into your integrity, the more tension you may create. Not because you are doing harm, but because you are no longer hiding who you are. And when you stop hiding, others are forced to confront what they've taken for granted. There will be people who loved your kindness, but not your voice. Who loved your giving, but not your limits. Who loved your empathy, but not your truth. And as you become more whole, more rooted in your moral center, some of these relationships may shift, some may fade, and that can be painful. Because being good doesn't mean you don't feel loss. It means you are willing to endure it rather than betray yourself. And yet, in this discomfort, something liberating happens. You begin to see that real connection can only grow in truth, that love built on suppression is not love, it is control, that respect earned through silence is not respect, it is convenience. You begin to crave honesty more than harmony. You begin to choose self-respect over being liked, and in doing so, you reclaim your goodness not as a role you perform, but as a truth you embody. This kind of goodness does not shrink, It does not apologize for existing. It does not bend in the wind of others' expectations. It stands firm, not in arrogance, but in principle. It is a quiet strength, a presence that says, "I will treat you with dignity, but I will not lie to keep you comfortable." That is the paradox. Your goodness may make others uncomfortable, but that discomfort is often the first step toward growth. There is power in your discomforting presence. It can break cycles, it can invite change, it can inspire reflection in ways that niceness never will. Because when people are challenged with love, something shifts. When they are faced with someone who refuses to enable harm, they are forced to ask, why? They may not thank you, they may not understand you, but your impact is real. And even when it feels invisible, it matters. Every time you hold a boundary, you teach others that they can too. Every time you speak truth in a room full of silence, you create space for others to find their voice. Every time you walk away from what diminishes you, you model the kind of integrity that has the power to shift culture, not through force, but through example. Being a good person is not about being easy to be around. It is about being true, and truth by its nature disrupts. It asks questions. It holds up mirrors. It says, "This isn't right," even when everyone else is pretending it is. That is not weakness. That is moral courage. And moral courage is never comfortable for anyone. You will not always be liked, but you will be trusted. You will be known, not as someone who pleases, but as someone who can be counted on to tell the truth, to do what's right, to stand up when it matters. And in the long run, that matters more than approval. That matters more than popularity. That matters more than ease. So, if your goodness is making people uncomfortable, take heart. You are not doing it wrong. You are doing it right. You are choosing depth over performance. You are choosing truth over illusion. You are choosing love that transforms over comfort that stagnates. And while that choice may be difficult, it is sacred. Let your life be a testament to the kind of goodness that doesn't just soothe, but awakens. The kind that doesn't just please, but heals. The kind that doesn't just comfort, but calls us all to become more whole. Torn between truth and tact, the battle between honesty and kindness. Who wins? There is a tension that lives quietly in the heart of every good person, the conflict between telling the truth and being kind. It is not always a matter of right versus wrong, but of timing, tone, and tenderness. On one hand, truth is clarity. It is the foundation of trust, of authenticity, of integrity. On the other, kindness is compassion. It is the balm that softens life's rough edges. But what happens when these two forces collide? What happens when the truth might hurt someone you care about? What do you do when honesty and kindness don't walk hand in hand? This is the subtle battle between truth and tact. Both noble in intention, both essential in their own ways, but when faced with the choice between being honest and being gentle, the good person often hesitates. They don't want to lie, but they don't want to wound. They don't want to mislead, but they also don't want to be cruel. So they hover in the space between, searching for the right words, if there even are any. The fear is real. Truth has weight. Once spoken, it cannot be taken back. It can cut deeper than intended. It can fracture relationships, unsettle comfort, and stir emotions that were long buried. And for someone who values peace, the idea of causing hurt, even accidentally, can be unbearable. So they tread carefully, choosing their language with surgical precision, hoping to balance honesty with grace. Yet sometimes, no matter how softly truth is spoken, it still stings. Because the truth doesn't always align with what someone wants to hear. It may challenge their beliefs, expose their blind spots, or confront their behavior. And when this happens, kindness can feel like a betrayal of truth, and truth can feel like a betrayal of kindness. This dilemma becomes even more complex when the good person is someone who sees nuance, They understand that timing matters, that people are often doing the best they can, that there are layers to every story. So they ask themselves, is this the right moment? Is it my place? Will it help or just hurt? These are not the questions of someone afraid of truth. These are the questions of someone trying to wield it responsibly. But the cost of this hesitation is real. When truth is constantly postponed in the name of kindness, honesty begins to erode. Relationships grow shallow, issues remain unspoken, resentment builds beneath the surface. What begins as compassion quietly turns into concealment, and concealment, over time, becomes distance. On the other hand, truth delivered without tact can create just as much harm. Brutal honesty may be praised as realness or transparency, but it often lacks emotional intelligence. It fails to consider how words land. It forgets that tone matters, that timing matters, that people don't just need truth, they need care. The challenge is not to choose between truth or tact, but to hold both, to learn the delicate art of speaking honestly without abandoning kindness. This is not easy. It requires presence, it requires empathy, it requires the humility to admit that your truth is not a weapon, but a window into your values, your observations, your intentions, not a hammer to prove you're right. Speaking truth with tact is an act of balance. It is not silence, it is not evasion. It is the courageous decision to say what matters in a way that respects the humanity of the person receiving it. Sometimes this means softening your language. Sometimes it means choosing a different time. Sometimes it means listening before speaking, but it never means abandoning what is real. There's a temptation, especially for good people, to sugarcoat or sidestep in the name of compassion. But kindness without truth becomes a mask. It creates a surface-level peace that hides deeper unrest. It says, "I'll protect you from the truth," even when that truth might be the very thing someone needs to hear to grow, to heal, to change. True kindness does not lie. It does not manipulate. It does not withhold what is honest just to avoid discomfort. Real kindness walks hand in hand with truth, not always smoothly, but always intentionally. It knows that discomfort is not the enemy, that temporary hurt is sometimes the path to long-term healing, that protecting someone's feelings in the short term can sometimes prevent them from facing what they truly need to confront. And yet this path requires deep discernment. It means asking yourself not just, is this true, but also, is this necessary? Is this helpful? Is this the right time? These are not excuses for silence, they are reflections of care. Because truth, when spoken with cruelty, loses its moral weight, and kindness, when offered without honesty, loses its depth. There's also an inner truth to consider. The good person often swallows their own feelings to protect others. They silence their needs, their frustrations, their disappointments, all in the name of being kind. But unspoken truth doesn't disappear, it accumulates. It builds tension in the body. It creates anxiety, resentment, distance. And one day it bursts. Not as clear communication, but as rage, withdrawal, or collapse. Honesty is not just about telling others the truth. It is also about telling yourself the truth and honoring it. Speaking up when something feels wrong. Naming what you feel, even if it's inconvenient. Giving voice to your boundaries. This self-honesty is just as sacred as any other. And without it, your kindness becomes a performance rather than a practice. It's also important to recognize that not everyone will receive your truth well, no matter how gently you speak, no matter how much you care. Some people will feel threatened, some will become defensive, some will accuse you of being unkind simply because you no longer mirror their version of the world. This is part of the risk. But it does not mean you're wrong. It means you're real. So how do you navigate this battle, this fragile, flickering line between honesty and kindness? You do it with intention, you choose your words with care, but you don't silence your soul. You honor the dignity of others without abandoning your own truth. You trust that it's possible to be both honest and kind, that courage and compassion are not opposites, but allies. And when you don't get it right, when you speak too soon, or wait too long, or say too much, you offer yourself grace. You reflect, you learn, you try again. Because the goal is not to be perfect, the goal is to be present, to be truthful, to be human. At the heart of this struggle is the desire to love well, to be good, not just in action, but in intention, to leave others better, not bruised, to tell the truth in a way that builds bridges, not burns them. And while you may not always succeed, the very effort is a kind of beauty. It is a testament to your heart. So, speak your truth, not with fire, but with warmth, not with force, but with faith. Trust that honesty and kindness can coexist, not easily, but earnestly. And in that coexistence, you will find something rare, the kind of goodness that heals, the kind that grows, the kind that does not choose between truth and love, but lives in both. When helping hurts, how saving people sometimes keeps them stuck. Helping others is one of the most natural instincts of a good person. It comes from empathy, from compassion, from a sincere desire to ease someone else's suffering. You see someone hurting and you want to fix it. You see someone lost and you want to guide them. You see someone drowning in life and you extend your hand. But what happens when helping doesn't heal? What happens when your good intentions become a crutch? When your efforts to save someone are the very thing keeping them from saving themselves? This is the painful paradox. Sometimes helping hurts. Sometimes stepping in too quickly or too often can keep a person stuck in cycles they need to break on their own. It's not because you lack wisdom, it's not because you don't care, it's because rescue, when offered too freely, can remove the very struggle someone needs in order to grow. And for the person who defines themselves by their goodness, that realization can feel like betrayal. The desire to help is powerful. It makes you attentive, generous, and selfless. But it can also become compulsive. You begin to scan every relationship for distress signals. You find yourself drawn to people in crisis. You feel responsible for fixing things, situations, emotions, even people. And over time, helping becomes less about offering support and more about managing someone else's experience. You may not notice it at first. You may simply feel needed, valued, useful. There is a quiet satisfaction that comes from being the one who others rely on. But slowly, patterns emerge. The people you help don't seem to improve. The same crises repeat. The same mistakes resurface. Your advice goes unheeded. Your support becomes expected. And what once felt like compassion now feels like exhaustion. The truth is, not everyone wants to be saved. Some people want to be seen, some want to be heard, some simply want attention, and some have grown so used to their struggle that they wear it like a second skin. Your help, no matter how sincere, cannot change what they are not yet ready to release. And when you step in repeatedly, without boundaries, you may end up enabling rather than empowering. Enabling and empowering. Enabling is a subtle erosion of agency. It says, "You don't have to face this because I'll carry it for you." It says, "You don't have to change because I'll absorb the consequences." Over time, the person on the receiving end may begin to rely on your strength instead of developing their own. They stop seeking solutions, they stop growing, and all the while you are pouring yourself into a container that can never be filled. Helping becomes harmful when it interrupts accountability, when it shields someone from the impact of their actions, when it creates dependency instead of development. And for the helper, this can be heartbreaking, because your intentions are pure, your heart is open, but good intentions do not guarantee good outcomes. Sometimes, the kindest thing you can do is step back. This stepping back is not abandonment, it is trust. It is the belief that the person you care about is capable, even if they don't yet believe it themselves. It is a shift from rescuing to respecting, from controlling to empowering, from fixing to witnessing. And it is one of the hardest transitions a good person can make. You may feel guilty, you may feel selfish, you may hear the voice in your head saying, "If I don't help, who will?" But ask yourself, are you helping because they need it, or because you need to feel needed? Are you helping because it's the right thing, or because you're afraid of what will happen if you don't? The urge to save often masks a deeper discomfort with powerlessness. We hate to see others struggle because we know what struggle feels like. We project our own pain onto them. We assume they must need what we once needed. But their path is not our path. Their lessons are not our lessons. And our interference, however loving, can sometimes rob them of their own transformation. Letting someone face their consequences is not cruelty, it is clarity. It honors their autonomy. It acknowledges their strength. It says, "I believe in you enough to let you fall and to trust that you will rise." And in many cases, people only begin to change when the weight of their own choices becomes too heavy to ignore. But this is not about watching people suffer with indifference. It's about redefining what help looks like. Sometimes help is listening, not advising. Sometimes it's asking questions instead of offering answers. Sometimes it's saying, "I'm here if you need me," and meaning it, without trying to steer the outcome. It is being a presence, not a prescription. This requires patience, faith, restraint, and for the person who is used to fixing, it can feel like failure. But it is not failure. It is wisdom. It is learning that your love doesn't have to look like control, that your support doesn't have to mean sacrifice, that your compassion doesn't have to cost your peace. You are not responsible for everyone's healing. You are not obligated to carry what is not yours. You can offer your heart, your ear, your encouragement, but the work belongs to them. And when you try to do that work for them, you rob both of you of something sacred. You rob them of their growth. You rob yourself of your energy, your clarity, your boundaries. Helping others must begin with helping yourself, with checking in on your own motives, with asking, "Am I offering this freely or out of fear, out of guilt, out of habit?" Because sometimes what looks like help is actually an avoidance of discomfort, of confrontation, of letting go. And until you confront that within yourself, your helping will always carry hidden strings. You are allowed to care deeply and still have limits. You are allowed to love someone and still say no. You are allowed to be present without being responsible. And you are allowed to walk away, not in anger, but in recognition that your role in their story is not to rescue, but to respect. Helping that uplifts is rooted in respect. It sees the other person not as broken, but as becoming, not as helpless, but as whole in process. It says, "You are capable, you are strong, you will figure this out, and I will be here, not to do it for you, but to walk beside you if you choose to rise." This is what true support looks like. It is not about being the hero, it is about being a witness. It is about holding space, not taking over. It is about offering tools, not taking the wheel. And it is about honoring the dignity of struggle, the sacred fire through which we all are forged. So if your helping has begun to hurt, if you feel drained, resentful, trapped, pause. Reflect. Ask yourself if what you're offering is truly helpful, or if it's keeping someone from facing what they need to face. And then, with love, adjust. Step back if you must. Let go of the need to be the savior. Trust that sometimes the greatest act of love is faith in another's journey. In the end, helping is most powerful when it liberates, not when it binds, not when it controls, not when it rescues, but when it reminds. Reminds them of their strength, their agency, their light, and reminds you that your worth is not measured by how many people you save, but by how well you love, without losing yourself in the process. The loneliness of virtue. Why goodness often walks alone in a crowd. There is a quiet, persistent solitude that often comes with choosing the path of goodness. It is not the kind of loneliness that arises from being unloved or unnoticed. It is deeper, more subtle, more existential. It is the loneliness of virtue, the ache that comes from walking a path few choose. The distance that forms when you decide to live by your values, even when the world around you takes shortcuts. Being good, truly good, often means standing alone in moments that matter, and that kind of solitude is as noble as it is painful. Goodness does not always fit neatly into social circles. It can be inconvenient, it can be disruptive, it can challenge the comfortable silence of conformity. When you choose not to participate in gossip, when you refuse to laugh at cruelty, when you step away from actions that betray your integrity, you may find yourself on the outside. You may become the one who's too serious, too sensitive, too moral. People may admire your principles in theory, but in practice, they often find them uncomfortable. Because goodness holds up a mirror, it reflects what others don't want to see in themselves. And when you stand in that reflection, not to judge, but simply to live your truth, you become a reminder of what's possible, of what's lacking, of what others have chosen to ignore, and not everyone wants that reminder. So they distance themselves, they ridicule, they exclude. They say, "You think you're better than us?" When in reality, you're just trying to be better than you were yesterday. There is a cost to virtue, not because goodness is wrong, but because it is rare, and anything rare is often misunderstood. In a world where moral compromise is normalized, integrity can feel like rebellion, kindness can be mistaken for weakness, boundaries can be seen as selfishness, and consistency can be seen as rigidity. When you live with conviction, you make others question their own, and not everyone welcomes that feeling. So the good person often walks alone, not by choice but by necessity. They turn down invitations that ask them to betray their values. They step away from environments that celebrate harm. They choose truth over comfort. And with each of these choices, a little more space opens up between them and the crowd. Not because they're aloof, not because they don't care, but because they care too much to pretend. This loneliness is not always visible. On the outside, the good person may be surrounded by people. They may laugh, show up, participate. But inside, there is often a quiet awareness that their inner world is not fully understood, that their sensitivity is seen as fragility, that their convictions are seen as limitations, and so they carry the weight of their morals alone, not as a burden, but as a quiet vow. It can be tempting to let go, to relax the standards, to blend in, to soften your truth in exchange for belonging, and many do for a time. But the cost is steep, because the moment you begin to abandon yourself for the sake of connection, the loneliness doesn't go away, it just changes shape. It becomes the loneliness of disconnection from your own soul. And that kind of loneliness is far more painful than standing alone in a crowd. True belonging does not require betrayal. It does not ask you to dim your light. It does not punish you for your principles. But it is rare, and until you find it, you may spend long stretches of your life in solitude. You may find yourself misunderstood, mischaracterized, or overlooked. You may watch as louder, flashier, more compromising voices are celebrated while you remain unseen. And still, you stay the course. Because your virtue is not a performance, it is a commitment, a quiet promise you made to yourself that you would live with honesty, that you would treat people with dignity, that you would act with care, even when no one is watching. And while the crowd may not reward you for that, your soul does. Your peace does. Your future does. The loneliness of virtue is not without its gifts. It gives you depth. It gives you clarity. It gives you the strength to be alone without being lost. And over time, it leads you to others who live the same way. Not many, but enough. People who speak your language of integrity. People who see your solitude not as a flaw but as a sign. People who understand that silence in the face of injustice is not peace but complicity, and who stand beside you, even if it's just a few of them. Until then, you become your own companion. You walk with your values. You find comfort in your own alignment. You sit with the discomfort of being different, not because you enjoy it, but because you've learned that some things are more important than fitting in. And slowly, that loneliness becomes less bitter. It becomes a sacred space, a place of clarity, a place where you can hear your own voice without interference. You begin to see that not all solitude is sorrow, that being alone in your virtue is not the same as being lost, that walking the path of integrity may narrow your circle, but it will widen your soul. It will fill you with the kind of quiet pride, not boastful, but firm, the kind of pride that says, I didn't take the easy road, I took the right one. And when the world tries to tell you otherwise, when it tries to convince you that you're missing out, that you're too idealistic, too upright, remember that virtue is not measured by popularity, it's measured by peace. It's measured by how you sleep at night, by how you treat those who can do nothing for you, by how willing you are to be consistent even when no one is clapping. Let the loneliness of virtue be your teacher. Let it teach you patience, humility, strength. Let it refine your purpose. Let it strip away the noise and leave you with what's real. And trust that in time, your path will intersect with others who walk with the same kind of quiet dignity. Being good is not easy. It is not always rewarding. It will not always make you popular, but it will make you whole. And in a fractured world, wholeness is a radical thing. So walk on, even when the road is empty, even when the voices grow silent, even when the weight feels heavy. You are not lost. You are just ahead, and one day others will catch up, not because you told them to, but because you showed them how. The paradox of humility. If you're truly humble, can you ever acknowledge your own goodness? Humility is a virtue we're taught to admire. It's the quiet strength that whispers instead of shouts. It is the choice to let your actions speak louder than your words. It is the refusal to place yourself above others, no matter what you've done or how far you've come. And yet, humility carries with it a strange paradox. If you are truly humble, are you allowed to acknowledge your own goodness? Can you recognize your light without dimming it in the name of modesty? This question lingers silently in the minds of many good people. They want to stay grounded, to avoid arrogance, to remain kind and self-aware. But in their effort to be humble, they often shrink themselves. They downplay their compassion. They brush aside their contributions. They refuse compliments. They pretend they are not special, even when they are. And while this may look like humility, sometimes it is something else entirely. Sometimes it is self-erasure disguised as virtue. True humility is not the denial of your gifts. It is the understanding that your gifts do not make you better than others. That your goodness is not a currency but a responsibility. It is knowing your value without needing to advertise it. It is walking with confidence, not arrogance. And it is the ability to say, yes, I did something good, without inflating your ego or expecting applause. But for many, the line feels blurry. They fear that acknowledging their goodness will make them seem proud or self-serving. So they stay quiet. They hide their strengths behind the mask of modesty. They deflect praise. They act smaller than they are. And over time, this false humility takes root. It begins to erode their sense of self. They forget how to hold their goodness in their own hands without apology. The paradox deepens in a world that confuses humility with invisibility. We are praised for being humble when we stay quiet, when we don't ask for credit, when we do the hard work and let others take the spotlight. And while there's beauty in quiet service, there is also danger in perpetual silence. Because if you never acknowledge your own light, how can you fully step into it? If you never admit to your own goodness, how can you live from it? Acknowledging your goodness is not arrogance. It is honesty. It is saying, I have done the work. I have grown. I have chosen love when it was easier to choose fear. I have shown up with compassion, with grace, with integrity. It is not about claiming superiority. It is about claiming truth. And truth, when rooted in humility, uplifts everyone around you. Think of the people you admire, not the loudest, but the ones whose presence changes the room. They are kind, but they do not shrink. They are wise, but they do not boast. They know who they are aware of their goodness, and because they use it with intention. They are not afraid to say, "This is what I stand for." They are not afraid to speak of love, of courage, of strength, not as ideas, but as choices they live by. This is real humility, the balance of confidence and compassion, the ability to stand tall without standing over others, the grace to own your goodness without making it someone else's shadow. It is a quiet knowing that does not need to prove itself, and it is deeply rooted in the truth that everyone has something sacred inside them, including you. False humility, on the other hand, is performative. It is fear in disguise. It says, if I shine too brightly, I'll make others uncomfortable. If I speak too boldly, I'll seem full of myself. And so you dim your light, not because you're humble, but because you're afraid of how others will perceive you, and that fear becomes a prison. A soft-spoken, well-mannered prison where your goodness remains hidden, even from yourself. There is no virtue in pretending you are less than you are. There is no wisdom in disowning your own light. The world does not need more people who play small. It needs people who are grounded in who they are. People who can say, yes, I try to live with integrity. Yes, I care. Yes, I choose kindness even when it's hard. Not to seek praise, but to live fully. When you acknowledge your own goodness, you give others permission to do the same. You create space for authenticity. You remind people that being humble doesn't mean being invisible, that you can celebrate who you are without turning it into a spectacle, that you can take ownership of your growth without needing to diminish others. Humility is not a competition. You do not become more humble by denying your worth. You become more humble by recognizing that your worth is one part of a greater whole, that your gifts are not isolated, they are connected, that your light is meant to shine alongside others, not in place of it. And yes, there will always be people who misread your confidence as pride, who confuse your honesty with ego, who say, you've changed, when you finally begin to honor yourself. But those who truly understand humility will recognize the difference. They will see that your self-awareness is not self-importance, that your voice is not a threat, it is a beacon. So ask yourself, have you been hiding behind humility? Have you swallowed your own praise because you didn't know how to receive it? Have you silenced your own truth because you feared it would sound like arrogance? And if so, what would it look like to speak from your goodness, not to boast, but to breathe? It might sound like, yes, I did that well, or I'm proud of who I've become, or simply, thank you, when someone sees you. It might mean standing in your values without apologizing, or showing up for others not because you need to prove you're good, but because you know you are, and goodness is what you choose. There is nothing shameful about knowing your own heart. There is nothing arrogant about honoring your path. And there is nothing selfish about stepping into your own light. The world needs that light. It needs people who are both humble and whole, who know their worth and still choose to serve, who speak their truth and still choose to listen, who stand tall and still offer their hands. So let go of the belief that humility means hiding. Let go of the idea that self-worth must be silent, and begin to practice a new kind of humility, one that makes space for your goodness, one that lets you be seen, not for attention, but for truth, one that says, I am grateful for who I am becoming, and I honor the goodness within me. In this space, humility is not about less, it is about balance. It is about living fully, loving deeply, and leading gently. It is about showing up as you are, without shame, without pretense. It is about allowing your goodness to breathe and trusting that it will not overpower, but inspire. Being good isn't always being nice. The difference between being likable and being ethical. There's a comforting idea that goodness and niceness go hand in hand, that to be a good person is to be pleasant, agreeable, and always easy to be around, that a kind smile, a gentle tone, and a soft presence are the markers of moral character. But the deeper truth is more complex. Being good isn't always being nice. In fact, sometimes being ethical means not being liked. It means doing what is right even when it makes people uncomfortable, even when it disrupts the peace, even when it costs you approval. Niceness is about harmony. It seeks to avoid tension, to keep things smooth. It often bends to accommodate others' feelings, even at the expense of honesty. It says yes to keep the peace, even when no is the honest answer. It prioritizes comfort over clarity, and while there's nothing wrong with being kind, problems arise when niceness replaces truth, when likability becomes more important than integrity, when people smile while betraying their own boundaries. Being ethical, on the other hand, is rooted in values. It is the compass that guides action, not according to how others will perceive you, but according to what you believe is right. Ethics require consistency. They require courage. They ask you to show up with integrity, even when that integrity is met with silence, resistance, or disapproval. Ethics ask more of you than image. They demand action, even when it's hard. The confusion between goodness and niceness often begins early. We're told to be polite, to be agreeable, to not rock the boat. We're praised for being easygoing and warned against being too much. We're rewarded for staying quiet, for getting along, for not making others uncomfortable. But real goodness sometimes makes people uncomfortable, because it doesn't always agree. It doesn't always nod and smile. Sometimes it says, "This isn't okay." Sometimes it says, "I disagree." Sometimes it walks away. There are times when being truly good means disappointing others, when your ethical standards clash with someone else's desires, when you say no to something that feels wrong and they call you difficult, when you choose principle over popularity. And in those moments you may find yourself questioning, am I being too harsh, too rigid, too cold? But the truth is, you are not being unkind, you are being clear. And clarity, though often mistaken for cruelty, is one of the deepest forms of respect. Niceness often avoids conflict, but goodness engages with it when needed. Niceness says, "Let's not talk about that." Goodness says, "We need to." Niceness avoids uncomfortable truths. Goodness tells them with compassion. Niceness appeases. Goodness holds accountable. And while niceness may make you likable in the short term, goodness earns trust in the long run. The good person often faces the difficult choice of whether to be liked or to be honest, to go along with the group or to speak up when something feels wrong, to remain silent to protect someone's feelings or to tell the truth with kindness. These moments reveal the core of your character, not in how agreeable you are, but in how brave you're willing to be. And yes, sometimes doing the right thing makes you unpopular. People may distance themselves, they may gossip, they may label you as harsh, uptight, or uncooperative. But those labels say more about their discomfort than your character. They reveal a preference for comfort over truth, for ease over ethics, and you must decide, will you trade your truth for their approval? This doesn't mean being aggressive or dismissive. Goodness is still grounded in compassion. It still listens, it still considers, but it does not abandon itself to maintain an illusion of harmony. It does not sacrifice truth for the sake of being palatable. It does not allow wrongdoing to go unchecked in the name of keeping the peace. There is a certain strength in being willing to be misunderstood, in knowing that your intentions are clean even when others twist them, in accepting that your ethics might isolate you but choosing them anyway. That strength doesn't always look soft. Sometimes it's sharp, sometimes it's direct, but it is always honest. In many ways, niceness seeks to avoid discomfort, while goodness is willing to walk through it. Niceness is about fitting in. Goodness is about standing out when it matters. Niceness seeks approval. Goodness seeks alignment. And while the two can overlap, they are not the same. One is driven by how you want to be seen. The other is driven by who you truly are. If you found yourself struggling to be both ethical and likable, know this: you are not alone. Many people wrestle with the weight of being good in a world that often values appearance over substance. But goodness is not about being adored. It's about being consistent, being honest, being fair, being accountable to something greater than opinion, your own internal code. You may lose some people along the way. That's part of the journey. But you will also gain something more valuable: self-respect. The peace of knowing that you did not bend where you were meant to stand. The clarity of knowing that your kindness was never a mask, but a choice rooted in truth. Being a good person means knowing when to be soft and when to be firm. It means having the wisdom to know the difference. It means being kind without being a doormat, generous without being exploited, open-hearted without being hollowed out. It means knowing that sometimes the kindest thing you can do is say what no one else will, to be the voice of honesty when silence would be easier. This kind of goodness takes courage. It takes self-trust. It asks you to listen deeply to your own conscience and to honor it above convenience. And it's not always easy, but it is always worth it. Because at the end of the day, likability fades. Crowds move on, opinions shift, but your integrity stays, your choices echo, your impact lingers, and when you live from goodness, not the sugary, surface kind, but the deep, unwavering kind, you leave behind something real, something rooted, something that outlasts the applause. So don't be afraid to be good, even when it makes you less likable. Don't be afraid to hold your ground, to speak your truth, to choose ethics over ease. Let your goodness be defined not by how pleasing you are, but by how present, how principled, how true you are. Because being good isn't about being liked, it's about being light. And the light you carry, clear, consistent, compassionate, will guide you through even the loneliest moments, and it will shine for others when they are ready to follow. Ego in disguise. When being good becomes a performance for validation, being good is often seen as the highest form of character. It's associated with selflessness, compassion, and sincerity, but even goodness, as pure as it may seem, can be quietly hijacked by ego. Not all acts of kindness are born from humility. Not all good behavior is rooted in integrity. Sometimes goodness becomes a costume, an identity worn not for the sake of virtue, but for the applause that follows. And when this happens, goodness loses its soul. It becomes performance, a polished mask, a carefully curated image crafted not for others' well-being, but for our own validation. It's easy to fall into this trap, often without realizing it. The line between true goodness and ego-driven virtue is thin, almost invisible at times. You donate not because you're moved to, but because you want to be seen as generous. You offer help not because it's needed, but because it reinforces your role as the kind one. You say the right things, take the right stances, play the part, because it feels good to be perceived as good. And with every nod of approval, with every compliment, the ego swells quietly beneath the surface. There's nothing inherently wrong with wanting to be appreciated. We are social creatures. We crave connection, acknowledgement, belonging. But when the desire for validation begins to shape our morality, we lose our way. Our goodness becomes conditional, driven not by conscience, but by recognition. We do what looks good instead of what is good. We say what people want to hear rather than what needs to be said. We serve, not from stillness, but from strategy. The ego is clever. It can adopt any mask, including that of humility. It will wear kindness like a badge, not to uplift others, but to elevate itself. It will volunteer, serve, support, then wait, silently, for praise. And when praise doesn't come, it grows resentful. It asks, "Don't they see how good I am?" It turns quiet service into a scoreboard, and when the applause fades, so does the commitment. This is not real goodness. This is ego in disguise. True goodness does not require an audience. It does not wither in the absence of praise. It is not performative. It is rooted in who you are when no one is watching. It is the quiet decision to do what's right, not because it will be seen, but because it aligns with your deepest values. It is unshakable because it is not based on external approval. It is anchored in inner truth. And yet, for many, the boundary is hard to find, because being seen as good feels good. It gives you identity, it gives you value, it becomes a form of control. You know how to be liked, respected, admired. You've learned the language of virtue. But in mastering the performance, you may lose touch with the reality. You may find yourself exhausted, hollow, constantly giving not out of love, but out of fear. Fear of being irrelevant, unimportant, unseen. Goodness that is driven by ego often leads to burnout. Because it's not sustainable, it demands constant output with little rest. It requires you to be perfect, or at least to appear that way, and perfection is a heavy mask to wear. It doesn't allow for mistakes. It doesn't allow for humanness. It turns goodness into a rigid identity, one that must be maintained at all costs, and the cost is steep. You begin to disconnect from your own needs. You become afraid to say no. You fear setting boundaries because they might make you seem less generous, less kind. You become a caretaker to everyone but yourself. You forget that being good doesn't mean being endlessly available. You forget that real kindness includes kindness to yourself. The irony is that the more you perform goodness, the further you drift from its core. Because real goodness is messy, it's imperfect. It requires discernment, not performance. It means sometimes saying no. It means telling the hard truth. It means setting boundaries, confronting injustice, walking away when necessary. It is not always soft, it is not always likable, but it is always honest. To move beyond performative goodness, you must confront your motives with honesty. You must ask yourself, am I doing this because it's right or because it looks right? Am I speaking this truth because it needs to be heard or because I want to be seen as brave? Am I giving from love or from fear of losing my identity as the good one? These questions are not meant to induce guilt. They are meant to return you to yourself, to reconnect you with the heart beneath the habit, because the good person, when lost in performance, suffers deeply. Not because they are bad, but because they've lost the freedom to be real. They feel trapped in their own image. They feel unseen, even when praised, because the praise is not for who they truly are, but for who they've pretended to be. And this pretending can be lonely. You become known for your goodness, but not for your humanity. People expect you to be calm, generous, wise all the time. They forget that you hurt too, that you struggle, that you get tired, and in trying to meet those expectations, you lose the space to be whole. To reclaim your goodness, you must let go of the need to be seen as good. You must allow your actions to be quiet again. You must risk being misunderstood. You must stop performing and start listening to your own needs, your own limits, your own heart. Because goodness that comes from within does not need to be displayed. It radiates quietly. It touches others not through spectacle, but through sincerity. And when you return to this place of quiet intention, something beautiful happens. You begin to feel whole again. You begin to serve not for applause, but for purpose. You begin to give with freedom, not obligation. You begin to rest without guilt. You begin to say no without shame. And your goodness, no longer filtered through ego, begins to feel real again. You are allowed to be good without being perfect. You are allowed to rest, to falter, to be unsure. You are allowed to be kind without performing, to care without proving. You are allowed to choose stillness over visibility, depth over recognition, truth over appearance. Real goodness is not a brand, it is not a persona. It is a quiet way of being that doesn't shout, "Look at me." It simply says, "I'm here." It is not curated, it is not marketed, it is not flawless, but it is felt in every small choice, in every sincere word, in every silent act that asks for nothing in return. So, step back if you need to. Lay down the performance, strip away the image, ask yourself gently, what does goodness feel like when no one is watching? And begin from there. The exhaustion of always doing right. Can you burn out from moral consistency? There is a certain quiet dignity in always doing the right thing, in choosing truth when it's inconvenient, in walking away from what's easy and stepping toward what's just, in being the one who holds the line even when no one else will. But this path, as noble as it is, comes with a cost. And for many good people, that cost is exhaustion. Not from any single act of virtue, but from the endless weight of moral consistency. It doesn't happen all at once. It builds slowly, almost imperceptibly. You say yes when others say no. You stay late when others leave early. You pick up the slack, carry the burdens, speak the truth, make the sacrifices. Again and again. You try to always be thoughtful, always fair, always kind, always strong. And while you're proud of living this way, there comes a point where even the most solid principles begin to feel heavy. Doing the right thing, especially over time, can begin to feel less like a choice and more like a duty, not because you've stopped believing in it, but because you've forgotten how to rest within it. You become so used to being the responsible one, the honest one, the dependable one, that you no longer feel permission to be anything else. You begin to fear what might happen if you let go, if you falter, if you say no, if you act outside the script of who you've always been. And that fear becomes its own kind of prison. You hold yourself to an invisible standard. You expect yourself to always know better, do better, be better. But the more you push yourself to live without mistake, the more unforgiving your inner voice becomes. The more you demand excellence from your character, the more disappointed you feel when you inevitably fall short. And slowly, without realizing it, your pursuit of goodness becomes a relentless internal audit. This is moral burnout, the exhaustion that arises not from doing wrong, but from trying too hard to always do right. It's not a failure of ethics, it's a failure of balance. It's the toll that accumulates when you live as if you are personally responsible for the world's fairness. When you feel you must be the one to always hold the light, even in the darkest rooms. When your identity is so bound to righteousness that rest begins to feel like neglect. You may start to feel tired in ways you can't quite name. Simple decisions feel heavy. You grow irritable, not with others, but with yourself. You feel frustrated that doing the right thing hasn't made things easier, that your integrity hasn't protected you from harm, that your consistency hasn't always been appreciated or even noticed. You begin to wonder, silently, if any of it really matters, and then you feel guilty for wondering. But this guilt is misplaced, because what you're feeling is not a failure of values, it's the body and soul asking for rest, for relief, for space to breathe without having to be perfect. It's the deep human need to not always be on, to not always be the moral anchor, to not always be the one who carries the burden of doing right. There is no weakness in needing rest from responsibility. There is no shame in admitting that goodness, while beautiful, can be tiring, especially in a world where moral shortcuts are everywhere, where selfishness is rewarded, where people who cut corners seem to move faster. When you live with a moral compass in a directionless crowd, you become a lighthouse, and lighthouses stand in storms. But even lighthouses need repair. Even the brightest lights flicker. Even the most solid foundations need reinforcement. You are allowed to step back. You are allowed to be tired. You are allowed to be human. Not as an excuse, but as a truth. Moral consistency should not mean moral rigidity. Goodness that demands perfection becomes brittle. It can't bend. And what can't bend eventually breaks. But goodness that includes grace, grace for your missteps, your fatigue, your limits, becomes something softer, something sustainable, something real. You do not have to be good every moment of every day to still be a good person. You do not have to get it right every time to be worthy of your own respect. Sometimes the most moral thing you can do is rest. Sometimes choosing stillness over striving is not selfish, it's sacred. The world will not fall apart if you step back for a while. The people around you will not forget your goodness if you take time to care for yourself. You will not lose your moral compass just because you pause to breathe. In fact, the more you allow yourself to rest, the more grounded your values will become, not from exhaustion, but from renewal. And in that renewal, something shifts. You begin to remember why you chose this path in the first place. Not for approval, not for pride, but because it felt right, because it felt like home, because it reflected the person you most wanted to be. You return to your goodness not out of obligation, but out of love. And that love, unlike obligation, does not drain, it restores. So if you find yourself weary from always doing what's right, know that you are not alone. There are others like you, quietly carrying the weight of integrity, quietly asking if it's okay to rest. And the answer is yes. Yes, you can rest. Yes, you can be tired. Yes, you can put down the burden of being good long enough to simply be. Because you are not a machine of virtue. You are not a moral performance. You are a living, breathing soul, and your goodness will not disappear just because you take a break. It is a part of you. It lives in your intentions, in your presence, in your quiet return to center after the noise has faded. The exhaustion you feel is not a sign of failure. It is a sign that your values matter to you, that you care deeply, that you are invested in being someone who lives with purpose. And that depth of care deserves your compassion, not just for others, but for yourself. So breathe. Let go of the invisible expectations. Let your shoulders fall. Let your thoughts quiet. The world is not asking you to be perfect, only to be true. And being true includes being honest about your limits. In time, you will rise again, not as someone burdened by goodness, but as someone buoyed by it. Someone who understands that moral consistency does not mean moral depletion. That you can be steady without being rigid, strong without being stoic, good without being exhausted. And in that balance, your goodness becomes not just something you practice, but something you live. No good deed goes unpunished. Why doing good sometimes invites hostility, not gratitude. There's an old phrase, often spoken with a mix of cynicism and exhaustion: no good deed goes unpunished. At first glance, it feels like a bitter joke, a phrase born from frustration. But for those who have consistently chosen to do what's right, who have given without expectation, who have stood up for others or stepped in when it mattered, the phrase carries a deeper truth. Because sometimes doing good doesn't bring praise. Sometimes it brings hostility. And the more pure the intention, the more surprising that backlash can be. We are taught to believe that goodness is rewarded, that kindness will be met with kindness, that generosity will return as gratitude. But life does not always operate within that framework. In fact, the world can be unkind to the kindest people. The more visible your goodness becomes, the more you risk becoming a target, not just of criticism, but of resentment, suspicion, or even retaliation. Why does this happen? Why would someone respond negatively to something so clearly well-meaning? The answer lies in how goodness can unintentionally challenge others. A good deed, especially one done without ego, acts like a mirror. It reflects not only light, but also shadow. It reminds people of what they haven't done, of what they've neglected, of what they know they should do but haven't, and that reminder is uncomfortable. Your kindness may expose someone else's apathy, your honesty may highlight someone else's deception. Your courage may make someone else's silence feel like complicity. And when that happens, people don't always feel inspired. Sometimes they feel threatened. Rather than confront their own discomfort, they redirect it toward you. They question your motives, they diminish your actions, they mock your sincerity, not because your deed was wrong, but because it stirred something in them they weren't ready to face. Sometimes, the punishment comes not from strangers, but from the very people you tried to help. You offer support, only to be met with defensiveness. You speak up for someone, only for them to distance themselves. You sacrifice your comfort, and it's met with silence or entitlement. The good deed, intended as a gift, is received as an obligation, or worse, an accusation. And you're left wondering, quietly, what did I do wrong? But you did nothing wrong. Doing good doesn't guarantee the world will respond with grace. In fact, the purer the intention, the more unpredictable the outcome. Because not everyone is ready to receive, not everyone is prepared to be helped, and not everyone sees kindness for what it is. Some see it as weakness, others see it as manipulation, still others, trapped in their own shame, simply can't tolerate it. There's also the uncomfortable truth that doing the right thing often disrupts what's comfortable. It calls attention to problems that others would rather ignore. It challenges systems built on complacency. It breaks unspoken rules, like the rule that says, "Don't get involved," or "That's not your business." When you choose to do good in these spaces, you are not just offering kindness, you are disturbing equilibrium, and disturbance, even when rooted in love, is rarely welcome. This is why whistleblowers are shunned, why truth-tellers are cast out, why those who challenge injustice often stand alone, not because they are wrong, but because they dared to act when silence was easier. They dared to help when looking away was more convenient. They dared to care when detachment was the norm. And for that, they are often punished, not by fate, but by society's discomfort. It's easy to grow disillusioned in the face of this reality, easy to question whether doing good is worth it when it's met with such resistance, easy to wonder whether it's better to retreat, to stop caring, to let others figure things out for themselves. But that disillusionment, while understandable, is not the end of the story. It is a necessary part of the good person's journey, the point where idealism meets reality and goodness becomes a choice, not just a habit. Because the most enduring goodness is not the kind that depends on outcomes. It's not driven by gratitude or recognition. It's not conditional on being understood or appreciated. It is grounded in a deeper conviction, a belief that doing what's right matters, even when it costs you, even when no one sees, even when the world responds with hostility instead of thanks. That doesn't mean the pain isn't real. It doesn't mean the backlash doesn't hurt. It does. There's a unique kind of heartbreak that comes from being punished for your kindness. It feels unjust, bewildering, heavy. But within that pain is also clarity. It reveals your strength. It shows you what matters most to you. It proves that your goodness is not performative, it's authentic. There's courage in continuing to do good even after being hurt. There's bravery in offering your heart again, knowing it might be misunderstood. There's wisdom in helping with open hands, knowing the gift may be rejected. This is the quiet resilience of those who live by principle. They are not naive, they are not soft. They are warriors of compassion, choosing to walk the high road even when it's lonely. It's okay to feel discouraged. It's okay to pull back, to rest, to reevaluate. Goodness that burns itself out is no longer sustainable. But don't let the world's reactions define your values. Let them refine them. Let them teach you where to give and where to step back. Let them remind you that goodness, to be real, must be rooted in self-awareness as much as in selflessness. You don't have to be everyone's hero. You don't have to save the world in a single gesture. You don't have to keep giving to those who only take. Your goodness is not determined by how people react to it. It is determined by your intent, your integrity, your consistency, and while it may not always be rewarded, it is always worth it. In time, your actions will leave ripples, even if you never see them, even if those you helped never thank you. Even if your good deeds were met with resistance, they still mattered. They still shifted something, maybe in someone's heart, maybe in the silent course of events, maybe only within you. And that in itself is enough. So when the world punishes your goodness, don't take it as a sign that you were wrong. Take it as a sign that you were real, that you chose compassion over comfort, that you moved through the world with heart, not calculation, and let that be your reward. Not the applause, not the gratitude, but the quiet knowing that you stayed true. Because even when no good deed goes unpunished, it still has value. Even when it costs you something, it still leaves something behind. And in a world that often forgets how to be kind, your goodness, misunderstood, unreturned, uncelebrated, is more powerful than you think. The inner critic that grows louder. The better you try to be, the more you see your flaws. There's a strange, often unspoken paradox that emerges in the lives of people who strive to be good. The more they commit to growth, to awareness, to living with integrity, the louder their inner critic becomes. It's as if every effort to evolve magnifies their flaws. Every step forward casts a longer shadow behind them. Instead of feeling more confident, they feel more scrutinized, not by others, but by themselves. And in that quiet scrutiny, the journey toward goodness becomes unexpectedly heavy. When you begin the path of self-awareness and moral clarity, you inevitably begin to see more. You become attuned to your words, your reactions, your choices. What once passed unnoticed now lingers in your mind. A careless comment, a missed opportunity to help, a moment of impatience, all become points of reflection. And while this self-awareness is part of growth, it also invites a companion that few expect, the inner critic. At first, this voice seems helpful. It keeps you in check. It nudges you to be better. It calls attention to your missteps and gently suggests course corrections. But over time, the tone begins to shift. What began as gentle guidance becomes harsh judgment. What started as accountability becomes shame. You start to feel that nothing you do is ever enough, that no matter how much you improve, your flaws are still louder than your virtues. This is the paradox. The more you try to be good, the more you notice how often you fall short. And because your standards are high, not for perfection, but for integrity, you begin to measure yourself with a ruler that grows longer every time you meet its mark. The better you become, the higher the bar rises. And in that quiet climb, your sense of adequacy begins to slip. You may find yourself replaying conversations, dissecting interactions, questioning your motives. You apologize not just for what you said, but for what you might have implied. You worry that your silence hurt someone, or that your honesty came off too strong. And even when others offer reassurance, the inner critic whispers, "You could have done better." What makes this voice so convincing is that it's rooted in truth, but not the whole truth. Yes, you could have handled that differently. Yes, you still have work to do. But that doesn't mean you are failing. Growth is not a straight line. It's a process of becoming, not just more good, but more whole. And wholeness includes imperfection. It includes grace. But the inner critic rarely speaks in grace. It speaks in absolutes. in always and never, in you should have and why didn't you. It takes a single misstep and magnifies it while dismissing all the quiet ways you showed up with love. It forgets your intentions. It ignores your context. It sees only the gap between who you are and who you hope to be, and names that gap as failure. For the good person, this is especially painful, because your goodness is not a performance. It's something you genuinely care about. You don't want to cause harm. You don't want to let others down. You hold yourself to high standards not for recognition, but because it aligns with your values. But when the inner critic grows too loud, it begins to undermine those very values. It turns your goodness into guilt, your integrity into insecurity. You begin to feel anxious, not just about what you've done, but about what you might do. You second-guess your decisions, your boundaries, your presence. You shrink, not because you lack confidence, but because you fear that any step might be the wrong one. You begin to walk on moral eggshells, careful not to crack the image you've worked so hard to build, not for others, but for yourself. And yet, the people who struggle most with the inner critic are often the ones who least deserve its cruelty. Because the voice doesn't grow louder in those who don't care, it grows louder in those who do. It doesn't haunt the careless, it haunts the conscientious. And in this way, it becomes both a sign of your heart and a thief of your peace. So what do you do when trying to be better only makes you feel worse? You begin by listening, not to the critic, but to the context. You remember that growth requires mistakes, that learning requires discomfort, that striving to be better doesn't mean you were never good. It just means you're paying attention. You remind yourself that you are not your worst moment. You are not your flaws, even when they're visible. You are not a fixed point. You are a process, a movement, a becoming. And every time you notice your own imperfection, it is not proof of failure. It is proof that you care. It is proof that you are still in the work. Then you speak back to the critic, not with aggression, but with compassion. You say, "Yes, I could have done that better, but look at how far I've come." You say, "That wasn't perfect, but it was honest, it was real." You say, "I'm allowed to be learning because you are. You always will be." The goal is not to silence the inner critic entirely. Sometimes it carries useful wisdom, but the goal is to keep it in its place, to make it a passenger, not the driver, to let it speak, but not to let it steer, and most of all, to counter its voice with another, the voice of the inner witness, the one that sees the full picture, the one that holds you with understanding, the one that remembers your intention, your effort, your heart. You also surround yourself with people who remind you of who you are, people who see your goodness even when you can't, people who offer mirrors that are kinder than your own, because in the absence of that reflection, the critic becomes louder. But in the presence of love, it begins to soften. And over time, you begin to trust yourself again, not because you are perfect, but because you are present. You are trying, you are showing up, and that is more than enough. You begin to carry your flaws not as shame, but as evidence of your humanity. You begin to walk with your imperfections not as burdens, but as reminders that you are still growing. So if your inner critic is loud right now, if every step toward goodness seems to come with a voice saying, "Not enough," take a breath, step back. Remember that goodness is not about perfection, it's about direction. It's about choosing again and again to return to your values, even when you falter, even when you doubt, even when you're tired. You are not failing, you are feeling. You are not falling short, you are showing up. You are not broken, you are breaking through. Let your goodness be messy, let it be real, let it be shaped by effort, not by outcome. And, when the critic grows loud, let your compassion grow louder, the selfless self. Can you truly give without expecting anything back? The ideal of selflessness is often held up as the purest form of goodness. The image of someone who gives freely, loves without condition, helps without reward, it feels noble, almost holy. We admire those who serve quietly, who put others first, who expect nothing in return. But beneath the beauty of this ideal lies a deeper, more complicated question. Can anyone truly give without expecting anything back? Is pure selflessness even possible? Or is there always some part of us, however small, that longs for something in return? To ask these questions is not to challenge the value of giving. It's to honor the complexity of being human, because humans are not machines of altruism. We are relational beings, woven into systems of meaning, identity, and emotion. And every act of giving, no matter how generous, carries echoes of our inner world, our desires, our hopes, our longing to be seen. Even the most sincere kindness often carries a silent wish to matter, to make a difference, to feel connected, to be appreciated. But does that make the giving less noble? Not necessarily. It just makes it more honest. The myth of the perfectly selfless person can become a burden. It can make people feel ashamed for wanting anything in return. It can turn the desire for recognition into a secret guilt. It can turn normal emotional needs, like the need to feel valued, into something to be hidden. But the truth is, to give and also hope for kindness, for gratitude, or even for reciprocity does not make your giving selfish. It makes you human. What matters is not whether we feel something in return, but what we do with that feeling. If we only give to receive, that's a transaction. But if we give with openness, knowing we may not get anything back and still choosing to give, then that is a gift. A gift with roots in love, not ego. And yet we should be honest about the ache that sometimes follows. The ache of giving fully and being met with silence. The ache of offering yourself and being forgotten. The ache of showing up for someone who disappears the moment they are full again. These experiences can hurt. They can make you question the worth of your effort. They can tempt you to close up, to guard yourself, to stop giving altogether. But perhaps the real strength is not in never feeling that pain, but in learning how to hold it without letting it close your heart. In learning to give not because you are certain of return, but because it is who you are. Still, balance is essential. True giving does not mean self-erasure. It does not mean allowing others to drain you. It does not mean saying yes when your soul is screaming no. Being selfless does not mean having no self. In fact, the most sustainable generosity comes from people who know themselves well, who give from wholeness, not from emptiness. When giving becomes an identity, when it's the only way we feel useful, loved, or important, it can quietly turn into a performance. We say yes even when we want to say no. We give even when we're depleted. We smile even when we're hurting. And in doing so, we lose the boundary between love and obligation, between care and control. True selflessness isn't about giving until you disappear. It's about giving from a place of clarity and freedom. It's about choosing to offer yourself, not to be loved, but because you already are. Not to be needed, but because you feel full enough to share. And yes, there may still be hope in that giving. Hope to be appreciated. Hope to feel connection. Hope that your kindness matters. But when you're rooted in self-awareness, those hopes don't drive you. They accompany you. They don't define your goodness. They soften it. You are allowed to want something back. You are allowed to feel disappointed when you don't receive it. You are allowed to be both giving and human. The goal is not to transcend all feeling, but to hold those feelings with grace. To notice them, name them, and keep giving anyway. Not to prove anything, not to be seen a certain way, but because generosity has become your way of moving through the world. It's also important to ask, where is your giving coming from? Is it coming from love or from fear? From desire or from duty? From freedom or from pressure? When you give because you believe it's the only way you'll be accepted, that's not selflessness, that's survival. When you give because you feel guilty if you don't, that's not kindness, that's conditioning. And when you give so you can feel morally superior, that's not compassion, that's ego in disguise. But when you give with open hands, open heart, open expectations, that is where selfless giving truly lives. It lives in the quiet act that no one sees, in the message sent without need for reply, in the forgiveness offered even if it's never acknowledged, in the moment you help someone who will never know your name. These moments are pure not because they are empty of emotion, but because they are free of demand. Still, you deserve to receive too. A life of constant giving without return is not sustainable, and it's not noble to suffer in silence. You are allowed to ask for support. You are allowed to hope that your kindness is met with kindness. You are allowed to build relationships that are mutual, not one-sided. You are not a well that never runs dry. You are a human being, deserving of rest, care, and love. So perhaps the goal is not to be perfectly selfless, but to be deeply generous, to give with sincerity, to help without manipulation, to love without needing to control, and at the same time to honor your own needs, to receive without guilt, to rest without shame, to say no when your heart is tired. Because even the most giving heart needs to be held. Even the most compassionate soul needs space. Even the most selfless person must return to themselves. There is no shame in hoping your goodness is seen. There is no weakness in needing love in return. What makes you selfless is not the absence of longing, it's the presence of love. Love that acts without needing control, love that gives without keeping score. Love that says, even if you don't return this, I still offer it freely. But love that also says, and when I am empty, I will pause, I will rest, I will return to myself before I give again. You are allowed to be both giving and grounded, both open and discerning, both selfless and self-aware. And in that balance, you find something more sustainable than purity. You find truth. You find love that moves from overflow, not obligation. You find a selfless self that still knows how to be whole. So give, love, offer, but do not disappear. And when you feel the ache of wanting something back, do not shame it. Let it remind you that you are alive. Let it remind you that your goodness is real, not because you never feel, but because you choose to keep giving. With awareness, with honesty, with heart. When morality collides with survival, what happens when being good puts you at risk? There are moments in life when the lines between right and wrong seem clear, where morality shines like a guiding star, offering clarity, purpose, and direction. But there are also moments when that clarity fades into gray, when survival enters the picture, and what is good suddenly feels dangerous, when doing what's right may cost you safety, security, stability, or even your life. And in those moments, the question becomes painfully real. What happens when morality collides with survival? This is not a theoretical dilemma. It is something countless people across time and cultures have faced. A whistleblower in a corrupt institution who risks their job for the truth. A bystander who steps in to stop an injustice and finds themselves in danger. A person hiding others from persecution, knowing full well they could be punished too. The stories vary, but the tension is the same. When ethics demand action and life urges caution, for the good person, this collision is soul-shaking, because the very compass that usually guides them, morality, now points toward risk. The values they've built their life around now lead to personal cost, and the question that once seemed simple, what is the right thing to do, becomes entangled with another, more primal one, will I be okay if I do it? In a world that doesn't always reward goodness, sometimes being good makes you vulnerable. Sometimes telling the truth means losing your livelihood. Sometimes standing up means being isolated. Sometimes being kind means being exploited. And yet, to abandon morality for the sake of safety can leave a person hollow, because survival without integrity can feel like a different kind of death, a death of self. But it's not always a clean choice. It's not always heroism versus cowardice. Sometimes Survival asks for silence, not because you don't care, but because you have mouths to feed, bills to pay, a life to maintain. Sometimes you want to speak up, but the risk is too great. Sometimes the cost is too high, and that doesn't make you weak, it makes you human. The tension here is real, because morality often asks you to step outside yourself, to consider the greater good, but survival forces you inward, to protect what is most immediate, most personal. And when those forces pull in opposite directions, the weight of the decision can be paralyzing. Some will say if it costs you everything, it's not worth it. Others will say if it costs you nothing, it's not moral. But real life lives in between, in the nuance, in the heartbreak of wanting to do more and not knowing if you can, in the quiet negotiations between your conscience and your fear. And in those moments, goodness becomes not just an act, but a burden. A burden that doesn't always come with glory. Still, there are those who choose the harder road, who speak truth to power, who step into harm's way, who risk their safety for someone else's dignity. And their courage is extraordinary, but even they are not immune to fear. They feel it deeply. They just choose to act anyway, not because they want to be martyrs, but because they can't live with the alternative, because their moral center is louder than their fear. And even when morality doesn't call for dramatic action, even when it simply asks you to be honest in a meeting or to say no to something unethical, the tension can be intense. You may fear being disliked, misunderstood, punished. You may worry about being labeled difficult or disloyal. You may feel the loneliness of doing what's right when no one else will. And that loneliness is real. Sometimes you might feel resentment. You might look around and see others compromising, cutting corners, staying silent, and being rewarded for it. And you may wonder, why am I the one paying the price? It's a fair question. Because in a world that doesn't always honor integrity, being moral can feel like a losing game. But here's the truth. Morality may not always protect you, but it always preserves you. It keeps you in alignment with who you are. It allows you to look in the mirror without shame. It keeps your soul intact, even when your circumstances are shaken, and sometimes that quiet preservation is more valuable than any safety earned through silence. That said, you are allowed to protect yourself. Morality does not require self-destruction. You are allowed to choose your battles. You are allowed to assess the risk. You are allowed to say, not now, or not this way. Doing what's right doesn't always mean doing everything. Sometimes it means doing what you can, when you can, with the wisdom of your limits. You can still live with integrity, even if you must move carefully. You can still be good, even if you must sometimes stay quiet. What matters is not that you are perfect, but that you are honest with yourself, with your choices, with your intentions. That you continue to ask, how can I live in alignment with what I believe, given where I am and what I'm facing? And when you find yourself in moments where doing good does put you at risk, let your fear be a teacher, not a dictator. Let it guide your caution, but not erase your conscience. Let it slow your steps, but not shut down your soul. Because morality is not just about action, it's about awareness, about being awake to the choices you're making, about being intentional in the spaces where silence feels safer, and about being ready when your voice is needed most. You are not obligated to burn for every cause. You are not required to lose everything to prove your goodness, but you are responsible for knowing what you stand for living in a way that honors your values, even when it's hard, even when it's scary, even when it costs you something. So when morality and survival collide, you walk that edge with care. You weigh the risk, you count the cost, you honor the fear, but you also remember who you are. You remember that a life lived only in self-protection may feel secure, but it often feels empty. That a heart disconnected from its values may survive, but it may not thrive. You are allowed to be both principled and cautious, both brave and measured, both moral and human. And sometimes, the most moral thing you can do is to keep going, to live with integrity in small, consistent ways, to hold the line when you can, to rest when you must. And to know that even if the world never rewards you, your spirit will. Because when morality puts you at risk, and you still choose to listen, you are doing something sacred. You are choosing your soul over your safety. And that choice, even in silence, even in solitude, even in fear, is the essence of what it means to be truly good. Is there such a thing as a truly good person? We grow up with stories of good people, the heroes, the saints, the role models, those who do the right thing, who are generous, brave, selfless, kind. We hear of their sacrifices, their integrity, their unwavering hearts. And somewhere along the way, we start to believe in the idea of the good person as something real, something pure, an ideal to aspire to, a title to one day earn. But beneath that aspiration lies a quieter, more unsettling question, one that follows us through adulthood, through mistakes, through growth, through contradiction. Is there really such a thing as a truly good person? It's a question that doesn't have an easy answer, because goodness, while simple on the surface, is impossibly complex in practice. It's shaped by context, by culture, by personal bias. What seems good to one person may feel wrong to another. One culture's hero may be another's villain. Even within ourselves, our sense of goodness can shift, depending on our fears, our desires, our wounds. And suddenly, the clear line between good and not good begins to blur. Most people want to be good. They want to live with decency, to treat others well, to contribute something meaningful. But even the most sincere among us carry contradictions. We all have our blind spots, our shadow selves, our moments of selfishness or silence. We all have thoughts we wish we didn't have, judgments we try to hide, regrets that quietly echo. Does that make us bad, or just human? And if we are human, does that mean true goodness is out of reach? Many philosophers have asked this very thing. Is goodness a state of being, or just a series of choices? Is a good person someone who always acts in alignment with virtue, or someone who tries, fails, and tries again? Does intention matter more than outcome? Does morality require perfection, or is it made meaningful by its struggle? Some would argue that there is no such thing as a purely good person, only good actions, that we are all too flawed, too tangled, too layered to ever be reduced to a single moral identity. That goodness is not a crown to wear, but a verb to practice. And this view has merit, because when we idolize the good person, we risk turning morality into performance. We measure others and ourselves against impossible standards, and when we fall short, as we inevitably do, we feel unworthy of the title, as if one mistake cancels out a lifetime of care. But perhaps the goal was never to become a good person in the absolute sense. Perhaps the question itself is misplaced. Perhaps goodness is not a fixed identity, but a direction, a daily intention, a quiet compass that you follow, not because you're certain you're right, but because you've chosen to care. This kind of goodness is softer, more fluid. It allows room for mistakes. It leaves space for growth. It sees morality not as a destination, but as a path, one that winds, falters, and continues. It recognizes that even good people can hurt others, that even with the best of intentions, we cause harm, and that being good is not about being flawless, it's about being willing to face those flaws with honesty and humility. Still, the question lingers. We look at ourselves in the mirror after a hard day, a hard choice, a hard truth, and we ask, am I a good person? And maybe the most honest answer isn't yes or no. Maybe it's something quieter. Something like, I'm trying, or I care, or I want to do better. Because the person who never asks this question, the one who never wrestles with it, may not be good at all. Goodness lives in the asking, in the discomfort, in the ache to do right, even when it's hard, in the refusal to let yourself grow numb to the difference between cruelty and compassion. The truly good person may not look like the one who always says the right thing or always gets it right the first time. They may not have the perfect record, but they are the ones who reflect, who apologize, who try again, who hold themselves to a higher standard not for praise, but because their heart won't let them settle for less. And yet, it's important to release the fantasy that we will ever reach a place where our goodness is beyond question. Life is too complex. We are too dynamic, and that's okay. Because goodness is not about winning a title, it's about returning again and again to what matters most, to love, to honesty, to courage, to care. Sometimes we confuse goodness with niceness, or with obedience, or with being agreeable. But real goodness is often inconvenient. It's uncomfortable. It demands truth when silence would be easier. It demands accountability when looking away would be safer. It is not about pleasing everyone, it's about remaining aligned with your values even when that alignment comes at a cost. The good person, if such a person exists, is not immune to doubt. They live in it. They question themselves constantly, not because they are unsure, but because they are awake. They see the complexity in every decision, the ripple of every action. They carry the weight of knowing that sometimes there is no perfect choice, only the best choice possible in a flawed world. So maybe the question is not, is there such a thing as a truly good person, but rather, how do I continue choosing goodness in a world that often makes it difficult? Maybe it's about holding yourself with grace when you fall, about choosing honesty when your ego screams for defense, about offering compassion to others even when you don't understand them, about showing up imperfectly but with heart. And when you find yourself weary from trying, when you wonder if it even matters, let this truth ground you. Goodness does not require grand gestures. It lives in the small things, in the way you listen, in the way you speak, in the way you pause before reacting, in the way you forgive, protect, nurture. It lives in the unseen, in the ordinary, in the moments when no one is watching. If you can still feel the weight of your choices, if you still care enough to question yourself, if you still want to grow even after all you've endured, then you are already walking the path. And that path, not a perfect label, is what defines a truly good person. Maybe there is no such thing as a purely good person, but there is such a thing as trying, again and again, to be better, to be real, to be human and kind at the same time. And maybe that is more beautiful than perfection could ever be, what we lose in the pursuit of goodness. To be good in this world is to enter into a quiet struggle, a daily tension between compassion and exhaustion, between courage and fear, between truth and comfort. It is not easy. It never has been. To live with moral clarity in a world so often governed by convenience is to swim against the current. It is to notice what others ignore, to care when indifference would be easier, to show up when silence would keep you safe. And sometimes it hurts. Sometimes it leaves you tired, isolated, or misunderstood, and yet, still, we strive. Why? Why choose the harder road? Why carry the burden of empathy, of responsibility, of conscience, when it so often goes unrecognized, or even punished? Why keep showing up with your heart open when so many choose to close theirs? Why speak truth when it rattles relationships? Why hold yourself to a standard the world does not enforce? Because something in us knows that this effort, this quiet, relentless striving toward goodness, is what keeps us human, what keeps us whole, what keeps something soft alive inside us when everything else begins to harden. The struggle to be good is beautiful not because it is painless, but because it is honest, because it is raw and real and rooted in a deep desire to live with integrity. It is not about being perfect. It is not about never faltering. It is about rising again and again, even when you fall. About caring even when it hurts. About loving even when you're afraid. It is the choice to remain awake in a world that often prefers sleep. And the truth is, goodness does hurt sometimes. It means saying no to shortcuts. It means accepting consequences. It means owning your impact. It means living with awareness of how your actions ripple outward. That awareness, while sacred, can be heavy. It can weigh on you. It can make the world feel like too much. But it can also make the world feel worth saving. Goodness isn't something you arrive at. It's something you return to, again and again, in every hard moment, in every moral dilemma, in every time you wonder whether it's worth it. And even when you don't get it right, even when you act from fear or fatigue, there is still something in you that aches to try again. That is the heart of the beautiful struggle, that refusal to become numb, that stubborn, quiet hope that your choices still matter. There's a kind of beauty in being the one who still cares when others don't, in being the one who notices, the one who stands up, who apologizes, who forgives, who tells the truth. It's not always glamorous, often it's invisible, but goodness, at its core, doesn't need applause. It just needs intention, presence, heart. When you look back at the moments that shaped you, they will not always be the ones where everything went right. They will be the ones where you stayed kind in the face of cruelty, where you spoke honestly even when your voice shook, where you offered compassion when it wasn't returned, where you chose not to become hardened by what hurt you. That's where goodness lives, not in perfection, but in persistence. The struggle to be good can also be lonely. You may find yourself walking away from things that no longer align with who you're trying to become. You may lose people, you may face misunderstanding, you may feel unseen, but even in that loneliness, there is clarity. There is peace in knowing that you are not betraying yourself, that your integrity is intact, that your actions are still in harmony with your values. And in time you will find others who walk the same path not because it is easy, but because it is honest, not because it guarantees success, but because it honors truth. You will recognize them by their eyes, by the way they listen, by the softness in their strength. They too are part of the beautiful struggle, and together, even in silence, you will hold space for what is sacred in the world. What makes this struggle beautiful is that it is chosen. You don't have to care. You don't have to try. You could turn away, many do, but you don't. Something in you keeps choosing presence over apathy, courage over comfort, compassion over convenience, and that choice, quiet, unseen, persistent, is an act of defiance in a world that often asks us to harden. Sometimes the most beautiful thing about goodness is that it's so fragile, and yet we still protect it. That we still hold on to it, even when the world tries to rip it from our hands. That we still carry it, even when it makes our arms heavy. That we still share it, even when it goes unreturned. Because we know, deep down, that a life without it would be far emptier than a life shaped by the struggle to maintain it. And let's be honest, goodness is not always clear. It's not always obvious what the right thing to do is. There are gray areas, hard calls, situations where no option feels clean. And in those moments, being good doesn't mean being certain. It means being willing to wrestle, willing to question, willing to sit with discomfort. That willingness is what keeps your goodness alive, not your clarity, but your care. You may never be sure if you're doing it right. You may always wonder if you could have done more or better or differently. But the fact that you ask, that you reflect, that you feel the weight of it, that is what makes the struggle worth everything, because goodness that is easy is rarely deep. It is in the struggle that it finds its soul. So don't be discouraged by how hard it feels. Don't mistake the struggle for failure. Let it be your teacher. Let it shape you. Let it open you. And when it gets heavy, let yourself rest, but not quit. Let yourself cry, but not close. Let yourself question, but not abandon what you believe in. Because this struggle, the one that leaves you tired but still trying, it matters. It matters more than you know. It shapes not just who you are, but the kind of world we live in. Every quiet act of kindness, every moment of honesty, every choice to stay soft when the world says be hard, it all adds up. It creates a ripple. It creates change. Not overnight, not loudly, but deeply. You may not always see the result, you may not always be thanked, but the work is still sacred. The path is still worthy. The struggle is still beautiful. So keep going. Keep choosing goodness, even when it costs you. Keep loving, even when it hurts. Keep striving, not for perfection, but for presence, for truth, for care. That is what makes you good, not because you have no flaws, but because you refuse to stop trying. And that, more than anything, is worth everything.